Between 1985 and 1991, any games that could be considered fighting games were far and few between. In fact, it was in this period of time that only 6 fighting games had ever been released. One of these games was a sequel that would change the genre forever, and was so popular, it made multiple port releases over many years. And today's game is one of those ports. This is Street Fighter II on the Super Nintendo. But before we our way through to the review, we have a shout out for this video's sponsor, Techries. They're your one-stop place for the latest in gaming and tech news. Plus, they host a podcast every Sunday on Twitch and YouTube. Follow the link on screen or in the description, and be sure to drop a follow to make sure you don't miss out. Released in 1992 on the Super Nintendo, every kid was clamoring to get their hands on the popular fighting game that up until then was only playable in arcades. Having sold 6.3 million copies in the SNES's lifetime, it's safe to say that there were likely many new console purchases along with the game. In fact, Nintendo and Capcom worked out a deal that would see Street Fighter II and its subsequent upgrade, Street Fighter II Turbo, packed in with the Super Nintendo console. It also really helped that Nintendo's main competitor, the Sega Genesis, didn't get a port until 1993 with the release of Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition. The popularity of the arcade version, along with it being made available on the SNES, really helped boost the Super Nintendo's popularity. It also had a lot of parents at the time asking if it was worth buying an entire new console just to let the kids play this one game. Firing up the game, we get a brief and simple message saying that this Super Nintendo version is licensed by, well, Nintendo. Then, that's followed by one of the 90s most iconic developer intros. I'm 8 again. When we get to the title screen, it's just the name of the game on top of a black background. This first SNES edition didn't seem to have the capacity to include the arcade's intro. You know, the one where one random fighter knocks out another random fighter, both of which are not even part of the roster? Yeah, that one. If you wait on the title screen for a bit, the game will show off a fighter's profile, followed by a brief computer-controlled demo, and then back to the title screen. If you kick back and don't touch anything for a while, this continues through all the playable characters until it loops back around to Ryu, who of course was the first fighter to be featured. Finally pressing start on the title screen, you're given 3 options: start a solo game, play with your friends in versus mode, or mess around with some options. In the options, you can adjust things like the game difficulty, having a time limit set or not, having stereo or mono audio, and adjusting the button layout on your SNES controller. They also had a music and sound effect audio test, but the numbering of the files and the buttons you had to press to cycle through them is really confusing. It really was an odd choice, but thankfully not impacting anything important. Starting a new solo or versus game will take you right into the character select. When playing with a friend, this edition didn't let you both select the same character. In solo mode, each of the fighters have predetermined matchup orders against the other 7 combatants. The fighting roster consisted of Ryu, a Japanese martial artist who was the main playable character in the first Street Fighter, is the poster boy for the franchise, and became the base template for multiple other fighting games to emulate. Ken, an American martial artist, was mechanically a carbon copy of Ryu with no altered stats or moves, aside from their throw animations. Later editions would add changes to them from one another, and sequels made them 2 very different characters that still had the same special moves, with different stats and effects to them. There was also E. Honda, a Japanese sumo wrestler, who was very agile for his size. Chun-Li, a Chinese detective disguised as a fighter, who I swear her thighs could crush a watermelon.
Stop! My penis can only get so erect.
Well, moving on, there's Blanka, a green Brazilian beast man with electrical powers. Zangief, a massive Russian wrestler who is slow to move but powerful when he lands a blow or manages to grapple you. Guile, an ace fighter jet pilot in the American Air Force who seems to spend a lot of money on hair gel. And the final selectable character, Dhalsim, an Indian yogi who wields supernatural abilities that can have him hitting you from across the stage or setting you ablaze like a tandoori oven. In addition to the 8 selectable fighters, 4 more opponents make themselves known once you dispatch of the playable roster, and you fight them in the same order no matter which fighter you chose. First, there was Balrog, an American boxer, Vega, a Spanish claw fighter, Sagat, a Thailand Muay Thai master, and finally, the big bad dictator, M. Bison. Now, a funky bit of trivia about Balrog, Vega, and M. Bison, their names are different in the original Japanese Street Fighter II, but once the game went to North America and the rest of the world, they had to be shuffled to avoid potential legal issues. In North America, we know Balrog as the boxer, Vega as the claw fighter, and M. Bison as the dictator. But in Japan, they're swapped, where the claw fighter was actually named Balrog, the dictator was named Vega, and the boxer was named M. Bison. Aha! And there we see the possible issue. The boxer was actually modeled after American heavyweight and all-round badass Mike Tyson. And if the similar name M. Bison were attached to that character, well, that would be grounds for some likeness infringement right there. But a quick swap-a-doo and everything is nice and legally hunky-dory. Oh, but don't think Sagat gets left out of some trivia. Not many people know this, but Sagat was actually the final boss of the first Street Fighter game, and his appearance really has an imposing boss-like look to him. He and Ryu's stories would intersect often throughout the Street Fighter lore. After you select your fighter, the game sets you up for your first match right away. Through a series of punches, kicks, blocks, and special moves, the goal is to drain your opponent's health bar before they can do the same. After winning a best-of-3 matchup, you move on to the next opponent until you end up besting M. Bison to win the tournament. A full run could last up to 30 minutes, and yes, I know better players could do it in 10, quit flexing. Aside from the gameplay being fun enough to keep coming back to, it also has 7 different styles of fighting and command inputs to try out, so you don't get tired playing the game with only Hadokens, Shurikens, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce that spinning kick move. But really, Street Fighter II's popularity and replayability really came from the versus mode. It was one thing to plow your way through computer-controlled opponents, but it was even better to survive a grueling battle against a friend and then trash talk them when you managed to land that final blow. Besides, the computer cheats anyways. Oh, you think I'm being a sore loser? Hold on to that thought, as it's actually been documented and supported by thousands of players and experts that Street Fighter II's computer-controlled fighters do in fact cheat. There have been consistent instances of the CPU reading player inputs, ignoring charge times, have a few extra iframes than the player, and even outright manipulating the hitboxes. The game was created to be a coin-munching arcade machine after all. Of course that gets frustrating, but since it's computer fighters, they're all learnable on how to cheese them back. And besides, the game is just much more fun and fair when playing against a human-controlled fighter. Also, with having to compress the arcade action down to a Super Nintendo cartridge, some stages at times had some slowdown hiccups mid-fight. Thankfully, it was never really during important moments, nor did it affect the overall gameplay. In fact, I would say it was actually impressive that the arcade experience translated over nearly perfectly. With the original Street Fighter having innovative fighting game standard that would last for decades, it was Street Fighter II that refined them while creating even more genre-defining mechanics. And being able to put all that to the test against a friend took these kinds of games to new heights of fun. The gameplay of Street Fighter II gets an 8 out of 10. Considering this was a port down from a superior arcade machine, Capcom had to be pretty selective with what they spent visual data space on. The intro was cut, and the visuals to the title screens were just plain black with text. Even the character select screen had to be pixelated down, but for an early Super Nintendo cartridge, it looks pretty great and full of some detail. This certainly didn't distract from the joy of having the game at home. Now, the character sprites and the meat of the game, they're excellent. They feel big and detailed. Not to the level of the arcade, mind you, but everything is translated well. Sure, you can nitpick about some of the finer details, but you weren't going to ever get a 1-to-1 pixel ratio in this port. All the characters still move like they did in the arcade, albeit a bit choppier, but the lower frame rate still covers all the motions well. And let's not forget the backgrounds. They're just as full of life and vibrancy as the arcade. So much so that, like I mentioned earlier, some stages actually caused a bit of mid-game slowdown from time to time. Overall, the Super Nintendo port of this game both benefited and was handicapped by having a template to work off of. Sure, they didn't have to make anything new, but sometimes it's a bit harder to try and decide what to take away rather than what to add. Regardless, it turned out to be an excellent visual port. The graphics of Street Fighter II get a 9 out of 10. Right from when you turn on the console, from the Capcom intro and onward, the game is chock full of iconic track after iconic track. The title theme is pretty short, but it's all you really need. The character select tune will make you linger a bit on that screen too. And every character has a theme song that portrays a bit about them as a character in the notes. Of course, we have the meme-worthy Guile's theme that supposedly goes with everything, but here was also the birthplace of iconic themes for Ken, Chun-Li, and even Ryu got his first theme here instead of in the first Street Fighter. Also, having spent significant time playing this lately for the review, I was surprised to find out how much I really liked Vega's theme too. How good this game's soundtrack is, though, shouldn't be much of a surprise once you hear who the lead composer was on the project. None other than the legendary Yoko Shimomura, who later went on to make such top-tier soundtracks for games like Super Mario RPG, Kingdom Hearts, and Final Fantasy XV, just to name a few. She knows how to make long-lasting ear candy. As for the sound effects, they're just as solid and iconic as the music. Sure, we have basic punches and kicks, but when they land, they have a satisfying sound to them. And of course, we can't forget about some classic special move callouts like
Hadouken!
or
Sonic Boom!
or
Yoga Lane!
to name just a few. Now, I swear, Sagat has a bit of an obsession with
Tiger! 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 Uppercut! Tiger!
the music and sound of Street Fighter II gets a 10 out of 10. Fighting games weren't really in my wheelhouse as a kid. Sure, I would see Street Fighter II arcade cabinets all over the place, but never bothered to sink my coins into them. It wasn't until one of my cousins got his hands on one of those Street Fighter II Super Nintendo console bundles that I'd even sniffed this game. Now, in hindsight, I would love to say that we spent multiple hours playing this game, whether it was just us or being at a party with all our other friends and cousins. But really, I still was a bit intimidated by this game. Sure, I touched it for a bit and really only managed to make any kind of mark while playing dhalsim, mainly because I could handle long-range fighting using his stretchy punch and kick, but command inputs were just not a skill I had at the time. So really, I was just watching or going off doing something else. It still says something though that whenever I think about specifically this edition of the game, I usually have an association with that cousin. The nostalgia hit of Street Fighter II gets a 3 out of 10. What the original Street Fighter started, Street Fighter II refined to become the true genesis of the franchise's popularity. It was followed by 4 more sequels and their subsequent editions, 3 prequel games, a plethora of spin-off games, a short-lived American cartoon, an anime movie, a 1994 Hollywood movie, another Hollywood movie in 2026, and so much other merchandise. It even can be credited as saving the fighting game genre, as it's been cloned and iterated upon in other popular fighting games too. I'm pretty confident in saying that without Street Fighter II, you likely don't get a lot of those other games. The game is also so important to the fighting game community because it inspired a more face-to-face style of competition as opposed to just chasing high scores. So revolutionary, in fact, that it was the direct inspiration for the creation of the Evolution Championship Series, also known as EVO, a massive American-hosted annual fighting game competition that continues to be held to this day. The game of Street Fighter II was a cultural phenomenon and genre-defining game in many aspects, and to have been able to take that sort of experience home was a godsend to fans of fighting games. An impressive port, the Super Nintendo edition of Street Fighter II is an iconic entry that helped the series and the console soar to new heights of popularity.